good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are glad that you are here. I invite you all to please stand if you are able for the singing of our opening hymn, How Great Thou Art. be seated. Friends, it is with a humble heart and a grateful spirit that I greet you as friends. Each of us arrives from a different corner of our community, but all of us united in our love for Peter Heegaard. And this love may manifest differently in each of us. Some might be here to celebrate a life. Others are here to mark this moment in our journey of grief, or both. No matter what brings you here, you are welcome, you are loved, and you are cared for. Our journeys of grief lead us to this precious occasion as we gather together in God's presence to remember Peter and to honor his life. We gather in the presence of each other to keep Peter alive in the ways that we love and serve the world. This is a holy moment, a sacred opportunity, a time held still in God's love. My name is Seth Patterson, and I am one of the ministers here at Plymouth Church in Minneapolis. And on behalf of the clergy, the leadership, and the congregation of this community that loves the Heegaard family very much, I welcome you. I'm honored to be in this space with you. Wherever you have been, wherever you are going, whoever and wherever you are right at this moment, you are welcome here. And we hope that you feel that today. Please open your hearts to these words from the great resistor of hate and violence, Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Nothing can make up for the absence of someone for whom we love. And it would be wrong to try to find a substitute. We must simply hold out and see it through. And that sounds very hard at first, but at the same time, it is a great consolation, for the gap, as long as it remains unfilled, preserves the bond between us. And it is nonsense to say that God fills the gap. God doesn't fill it, but on the contrary, keeps it empty, and so helps us to keep alive our former communion with each other, even at the cost of pain. Today, we will all be hearing many voices in memory of Peter from family and friends through words and through music. And these do not make up for the absence, but they may help us to hold it. They will speak of Peter and his life, his legacy, and his gifts. And these will be interspersed by music to help us hold all that we have heard and all that we remember, and that absence. And then we have an opportunity to join our voices together in poem and song, and then we get to go to the Minneapolis Club to share a meal and some more memories. All are invited to the reception immediately following this service. Anne really wants me to make sure that you understand that all are invited. Now, before I invite Sarah, Tom, and Susan up to begin the remembrances, let us pray together. There is no right way to pray, and there is no obligation to participate, but if you are willing, I invite you to find a posture of prayer together. God of many names and many spaces and many visions, but always found in abundant love, we gather together in memory and loss, in celebration and hope, in relationship and kindness. Continue to fill each of us, God, to surround us, to continue to be the connector between us, as we remember your and our beloved Peter. Root us in your abundance as we walk with Peter's family as they live a familiar life in a brand new way. Continue to give all who are mourning the strength to carry this grief and ask for the help they may require. And may we each be your hands and your feet and your voices in this world. Amen. Okay, Sarah and Tom and Susan, I invite you to come up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Heegaard. I am Kip and Lucy's oldest child, and Anne and Peter's oldest grandchild, and it is an honor to speak with you today. The last time I visited with Grand Pete, as we call him, was about a week before his passing and a few months before my wedding. I stopped by with Jack, my now husband, and we had a chance to visit and asked Grand Pete if he had any marriage advice for us. As he paused and was thinking about what that advice would be, my dad asked him, "Is it never go to bed angry?" Grand Pete, ever mischievous, smiled and replied, "Well, that's what your mother would say." There's so much I could say about Grand Pete, but I want to keep it short and sweet. And so I'll leave you with what his actual marriage advice was to me and Jack that day. He told us, "Take it one day at a time." Having been married all of 1 month, I think that's pretty excellent advice for marriage. But also for any kind of big love and any kind of big loss. Take it one day at a time. That's what Grand Pete told us to do. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Carrier, a longtime friend of Peter Heegaard, and I'm guessing that most of us here today could say the same. Pretty much everyone he met was destined to become a friend. It's the kind of guy he was. It's been said that a friend is someone who knows the song in your heart and can sing it back to you when you've forgotten the words. And I like to think that Peter and I knew that song. We first met in 1956, that's 66 years ago, on the campus of Skidmore College, an all-women's school in Saratoga Springs, New York. We were there for a common purpose, to win the favor of a girl named Anne. I hasten to add there were two Annes. Ann Mentner from Minnesota and Ann Davis from Upper Montclair, New Jersey. They were classmates, dorm mates, and close friends. Today they might be called BFFs or besties. I could spend hours telling stories about our many weekends at Skidmore, about Papa Stein's rooming house for men, $2 a night, sometimes 6 to a room, about the 10-cent draft beers, which we call affectionately dimes, about the picnics at the beautiful Yaddo Gardens outside town, and about Skidmore's archaic but strictly enforced Saturday night curfew. Peter and I hated that curfew. But our determined pursuit of the two Anns proved to be successful. In less than 3 years after that first meeting, both couples were married, eventually ending up in Minneapolis, remaining closest friends over the subsequent 6 decades. Each had 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Peter was a giant, not so much in stature, but in character. I'd like to just take a moment to highlight a few of the notable attributes that serve to define him. First, humility. How many of us ever heard Peter boast of his accomplishments? Of course, he didn't hold back when he was talking about his children, his grandchildren, his Anne, but never about himself. He was humble to a fault. I didn't even know he was writing a book until he presented me with a signed copy, and the same was true about his second and third books. Much of what I know about Peter today I read in the Star Tribune, including in Neil St. Anthony's moving tribute in the business section. Appropriate to today's gathering to celebrate the life of a man named Peter is a verse from a letter attributed to the Apostle Peter. He writes, "All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble." Will Rogers, the famous humorist and social commentator, put it this way. He said, "Get someone else to blow your horn, the sound will carry twice as far." Peter never even had a horn. Peter had a great sense of humor, and no one enjoyed hearing a good joke or story more than he did. But even more than hearing a good joke, Peter loved telling one. And on more than one occasion, his own laughter would prevent him from delivering the punchline. And I'm sure some of you remember that. Peter was a stoic. He was the most uncomplaining person I have ever known. He battled things that would make the average man or woman cry, "Uncle." But as we all know, Peter was not the average man. His answer to some of the curveballs he was thrown was not to ruminate on his misfortune, but to seek a solution. Several years ago, when he was told that he would be on dialysis for the remainder of his life, he learned how to do his own dialysis. And he bought a bigger van so he could haul his dialysis equipment along with his fishing gear to wherever the fish might be biting, whether it be the pristine waters around the North Shore or the sparkling rivers and streams of Montana. He loved them all. And finally, Peter was a man of faith, a quiet and deep faith. An active member of St. Luke's Church for over 40 years, and after moving downtown 20 years here at Plymouth, it is no coincidence that he and Anne made social justice their focus. They were responding to the familiar message in Matthew's Gospel when Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Peter and Anne, and now their children and grandchildren, have, through the years of dedication and giving of themselves, improved the lives of countless individuals and families and provided them with that precious commodity, which is hope. Thank you, Peter and Anne, and all those in your family who's followed in your footsteps, each serving as a beacon of hope for so many. Rest well, Peter, my good friend.
What a beautiful day. Good day for fishing or going on a hike. I'm Susan Heegaard. I'm chronologically the eldest of Peter and Anne's 3 children. Our dad loved his family, the family he was born into, including his big brother Roger, the family he had with our mom, and his chosen family, all of you. Thank you for your friendship and for being here today and for helping us celebrate Peter. One of the last things he said will resonate with many of you. Just days before he passed away, our cousin Eric was playing his guitar and singing songs. Remember that? And during a pause, he looked up and said, "There's just not enough time and hours in the day. I'm too busy to croak." How true. We all knew he was productive, making the most of each day, but it came even more evident after he died when we heard from people near and far who told of their relationships and experiences with our dad and how often he'd impacted their lives. Peter's productivity was mostly a great thing and sometimes a little irritating, especially at the time to a teenager when he would often have planned and structured activities and events for us. From bike rides to road trips, he was a planner and a doer. The one place I saw him rest a little was at his cabin in Lutzen, where he had his routine and projects and chores for every one of us. There we had our dad to ourselves, and it was really special, especially for our kids. Early each morning when we were there with him and our mom, we would hear the door open and shut, the gravel crunch beneath his feet as he made his way to the car, and the garage door open beneath the rooms where we were trying to sleep, waking us up way too early. Backing the car out, he'd head a short spell down the highway to see his friends Nan and Deb at Lockport for his newspaper, or stop at the Clearview store to check in, coffee sloshing all the way, all over the car. On his return, we'd hear the gravel crunch. He'd stop by again a little too early and deliver the paper, wishing us all a good morning. In the morning at the table, he had a usual breakfast that included eggs, home fries, bacon, grits, broiled tomatoes, fruit, and of course, more coffee. He'd sit down to eat with this pile of newspapers at the end of the table where he had a sweeping view of Lake Superior. There was a May and September ritual of raising and lowering the Danish, United Nations, Minnesota, and United States flags with the kids, a certain spot on the couch at night where he'd read, and when football season began, jaunts to the lodge to watch the Vikings game. We hiked and skied with and without him on trails all along the North Shore, and he loved disappearing for hours at a time in his solo paddle boat to cast his line on Mink Lake or one of the many pristine lakes on the North Shore. That's where I think of him now, casting his line on clear, shimmering water. Thank you, Dad, for sharing your commitment to community and giving back, and for influencing my career choice, public service. For deepening in us a deep appreciation of nature and the environment, quiet woods and pathways, water, hopefully filled with trout, peaks and valleys, and open landscapes. For humor and jokes, some great, some not so much. Often you laughed most, and your imitations, especially of FDR. Our dad was really funny. For family adventures and road trips across the country, you were the most efficient packer ever, where we jam into one hotel room. For helping us to be generous with our time and resources, making connections and lending a hand to those in need. For encouraging acceptance and tolerance and questioning the status quo. For supporting our education and most of our choices. For being curious, interested, and learning throughout your life, picking up Spanish and the piano in later years. I loved that about our dad. For the love of games, backgammon. For showing up for a really good grilled steak. For being handy, building all the bookshelves and tables and even a hot tub and a backgammon board for each of us. For making new friends and keeping longtime ones, and for so much more, and most of all, for being a wonderful dad. Here's to your wonderful life. We'll miss you so. Thank you.
Child alone and wild, a cabinet maker's son. Hands were made for different work, so heart was known to none. Left his own and went his lone, solitary way. He gave to me a gift I know I never can repay. Quiet man of music, denied a simple fate. I can be a soldier once, but his musing wouldn't wait. He earned his love through discipline, a thundering velvet hand. His gentle means of sculpting soul took me years to understand. Leader of the band is tired and his eyes are growing old, but his blood runs through my instrument and his song is in my soul. Life has been a poor attempt to imitate the man. I am a living legacy to the leader of the band. My brother's lives were different, for they heard another call. One went to Chicago and the other to St. Paul. I'm in Colorado when I'm not in some hotel, living out this life I've chose and come to know so well. Thank you for the music and your stories of the road. I thank you for the freedom when it came my time to go. I thank you for the kindness and the times when you got tough. And Papa, I don't think I said I love you near enough. Leader of the band is tired and his eyes are growing old, but his blood runs through my instrument and his song is in my soul. Life has been a poor attempt to imitate the man. I am a living legacy to the leader of the band. I am a living legacy to the leader of the band.
Ned, Lori, Kip, please.
I'm Ned Hartfield. My parents are Kate and Rick. I'm speaking on behalf of my sister Annie, my brother John, and myself. The three of us were blessed to have Pete as our grandpa. He was kind, caring, and always good for a joke. We have memories with him that will always be looked back on with smiles. Over the years, Pete and Annie had many adventures. A horseback trip to Colorado, watching grizzly bears up close in Alaska, and they saw their fair share of plays together. Annie's thankful for having Pete to explore with. Johnny and Pete had their own adventures and many laughs. On a trip to New York City with Nani and Pete when Johnny was in 7th grade, every day Johnny and Pete took steam showers and swam in the pool before sightseeing, and Pete called it boys' time, which Johnny got a kick out of. Johnny was always a receptive audience to Pete's colorful jokes and is thankful for Pete's unwavering sense of humor. Some of my favorite memories of Pete were just listening to him talk. When I moved back to Minneapolis after college, I would go to Nani's and Pete's for dinner every couple months. I loved hearing their stories of their life together, how the flip of a coin in 8th grade at Lake Calhoun decided Nani would crew for Pete that summer on a sailboat and start them down a road of 63 years of marriage. How they traveled together first to Indiana for the Army and around the world. I listened to stories about his career and his real passion, his decades of working to better the community for everybody. When I would ask Pete what he'd been up to, he'd tell me about practicing his Spanish and what he was working on in the Urban Investors program he helped found in 1997, or his most recent piano lesson. At our last dinner together, Pete laughed when he told me that after he was a bit stronger from his physical therapy, he might put on a piano recital because he was getting pretty good. I'm only half sure he was joking. Even in his 80s, he was still learning, growing, and working to better the community with the same passion and sense of humor that had served him so well. I'm thankful for that example he set. He led an amazing, uncommon life and touched so many people, and we're all lucky to have had him in ours.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lori Sturdivant, and I'm honored and grateful to be with you today. Grief is a nasty beast, but I have found that grief relaxes its bite a bit when we situate ourselves with like-minded company. So may it be so for us this afternoon. I spent 43 years at the Star Tribune in various roles, and 24 years ago, thanks to Elmer Anderson and Tom Swain, I started a sideline of helping notable Minnesotans produce books to preserve the story of their own public work. So when Peter called me in early 2007 with an offer to have breakfast at his favorite Nicollet Island Inn booth, I figured, well, a book must be what he has in mind. He probably wants to do a memoir, I thought. Why not? I didn't know Peter well then, at least not as well as I came to know him, but I knew him to be one of the busiest civic elders in this community, doing a ton of work for charities. His reasons for being so involved might make a fine story, I thought. But the Peter Heegaard story isn't what Peter had in mind that day. He explained that he had been systematically recording interviews with about a dozen people who had either founded or had jump-started dormant nonprofit organizations in the Twin Cities, groups whose mission was to lift disadvantaged people out of poverty. Most of these were organizations that Peter himself had served in some way, but that wasn't the point. He wanted to convey the value of social entrepreneurs. That was a phrase that meant a great deal to him. Peter had transcribed all his interviews, he told me, and he thought that they could be assembled as is. Slap a cover on them and he'd have a book. Or so he thought. He had evidently shown a few of these transcriptions to his children during the preceding holiday season. And then when he asked for their opinion of the book plan, one of them said, why don't you call Lori Sturdivant? Susan, Kip, Kate, whichever of you gave your dad that advice, thank you. I really liked what Peter wanted to accomplish. I liked his sense that these nonprofit leaders were heroes among us. That became our book's title. I was glad to help him turn these transcribed interviews into a readable narrative. At least I hope it was readable. It was sufficiently readable to convince Norton Stillman at Noden Press to publish them. And so our book came out in 2008. I loved the spirit, Peter's spirit, that infused those stories. Now, mind you, he took care to keep the spotlight on each subject and not on him. But he told each story with a spirit that I detected, not only in Heroes Among Us, but in Peter's subsequent books, More Bang for Your Buck, which was in 2011. I think I wrote the foreword for that one, and in Turnabout, which he was on his own for in 2015. That spirit was optimism. Peter truly believed that life can be better than it is today for many people, and indeed for all people. He believed that poverty and racism and the ills that they bring, crime, disease, despair, all these can be overcome here and now. He believed that sincerely. He believed that right here in Minneapolis, we have the know-how for that work. We've seen on a small scale what can be done. We've been shown that by the heroes among us. We have the data. We have the business plan, he would say. Now we need to apply that knowledge on a large scale. He wanted to inspire that large scale. Now, I don't mean to suggest that Peter was naive or Pollyanna-ish. He knew this work too well, too intimately, to oversimplify it. He was well aware of human complexity, in large part because he got to know so many of us, humans, very well. But Peter believed as a matter of faith and saw as a matter of practice that things can get better. Lives can be transformed. He subscribed to what our friend Elmer Anderson told me was a credo of progressive Republicans, which I believe Peter was once upon a time. It's that when people have genuine opportunities to be at their best, they can be trusted to seize those opportunities. Elmer would argue that creating opportune conditions for human thriving was everybody's responsibility. Peter showed by the way he lived that he agreed. He shouldered that responsibility as fully as anyone I ever knew. And he did so with an enthusiasm, an energy, a sense of humor, and an optimism that was infectious. People truly loved to sit in board meetings with Peter Heegaard. I saw Peter's optimism more recently in one other context that I wanted to share with Peter's family today. It was in mid-October, just last year, when my husband Martin and I had what turned out to be one last lovely Friday dinner at Peter and Ann's home. Peter's surgery was about 10 days away. It would be major, it would be risky, and Ann and Peter would have been justified to tell us that they were nervous or afraid, because I certainly felt that way for him. Instead, they both conveyed a sense of peace and courage and confidence about what was coming. Peter said he was eager to regain the active life he had loved for so long, and Ann wanted that for him. The surgery represented his best chance, he was sure, and he was bound to take it, knowing full well that the outcome was not assured. Martin and I were so moved by that attitude that it was hard for us to talk as we drove home that night. When we did, we said how remarkable these dear people were, how strong, how optimistic, how grounded in love of life and love for each other. And we added how lucky we are to have such friends. How lucky we all were to have Peter. He was a true hero among us.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann and Peter's son, Kip. And as the only son, also named Peter, I reserve the right to pause if necessary today. So I just want to say on behalf of our family, we want to thank all of you for taking time out of your Saturday, your weekend, to be here with us to celebrate Dad's, Peter's, Grand Pete's life. We want to thank you for your love, support, the calls, the cards, the emails, the words spoken. It all means so much. It means so much you're here today, and this gathering speaks volumes about how we are all connected. We also want to thank the many dedicated members of Dad's medical team, the doctors, nurses, caregivers, home health aides, and the hospice staff who cared for him in the middle of COVID. We also want to give a special thanks to nurses Vicki and Maggie at the St. Louis Park Dialysis Clinic, who helped Dad with his care over the past 5 years. Dad was, and we are so very, very grateful for the personalized care that you provided him. You made such a key difference in the quality of Dad's life these past several years, and we are eternally grateful to you. As many of you know, Dad suffered from kidney disease. He led a very active and healthy life, and it was a mystery not only to him, but also to all of us how such a healthy and physically active person could be suddenly and unexpectedly afflicted in this way, with no family history of diabetes or kidney disease. When he was informed by his doctors that he would need to go home on home dialysis roughly 5.5 years ago at age 80, Dad was obviously very disappointed. But he quickly accepted this cruel curveball that had been thrown at him, and he immediately moved on with life. As Mom can attest, he never complained or felt sorry for himself. Onward. That was Dad. There was no time or desire to focus on the negative. Rather, Dad channeled his positive energy on his loving wife, Ann, of 63 years, his family, his many hobbies and interests, and his continued lifelong goal of making this community and this world a better place for all. I think everyone here who knew Dad well would agree that he was always someone who looked forward versus backward. He also kept his wry sense of humor, as Tom knows, and Susan mentioned, and was a great story and joke teller, for which those of us who struggle at this unique craft is an art in and of it to itself. On our annual fly fishing trips together, Dad would always break the ice with a new fishing guide on our first day on the water by launching into one of his favorite limericks. Uncle Roger, you can appreciate this. You know, there was a young man from Nantucket. Well, you get the idea. Dad knew that laughter was the perfect icebreaker and connector. Home dialysis involves the process of having a plastic port or tube surgically implanted into one's belly, where saline is then flushed through the chest cavity daily over several hours, with the help of a dialysis pump in order to remove the toxins that the kidneys are no longer able to properly remove from the body. The dialysis process from start to finish takes about 8 to 9 hours. You have to be completely sterile, hooking and unhooking daily from the tubes and the pump, and as my sisters Kate and Susan can attest, it is a very detailed process. Dad carefully and diligently administered his own dialysis for over 5 years, each evening before bed. The average life expectancy for a person going on home dialysis at age 80 is about 2.5 years. Dad handily beat those odds, and he would occasionally say to me, "I've lived a great life, and now I'm playing with house money." I think there's little doubt that Dad's positive mental attitude was a chief contributor to his extended life, and it was truly inspirational to all of us. While Dad and Mom were unfortunately unable to travel internationally after Dad began going on dialysis, they were still active domestic travelers to their beloved cabin in Lutsen, on the shores of Lake Superior, to their various grandchildren's college graduations, to numerous bird watching trips all over the Midwest, to many fly fishing trips to Montana, as well as other domestic trips to visit the national parks and friends afar. In short, Dad did not let his medical condition slow him down. He was a doer, and he loved to explore all of nature's wonder and beauty. A few days before we brought Dad home from a difficult and lengthy two-month post-surgery hospital stay last December, our family learned that we would actually be the ones to have to administer his home dialysis, given his severely weakened physical condition. We were trained over 2 days by the very best, Maggie at the dialysis clinic. My sisters, my mom, and I were honored and grateful to be able to step in and tend to Dad's daily care for that final month at home. It was a gift, truly. Dad and I shared a number of hobbies and interests, from reading about history to playing backgammon, the Heegaard family game, going back 4 generations, to downhill skiing, so many wonderful trips out west, skiing in the Rockies with the Tuttle extended Heegaard crew, carriers, strands, monarchs, to his favorite pastime, fly fishing. I was fortunate enough to join Dad on several incredible father-son fly fishing trips to Alaska, New Zealand, Montana, Wisconsin, and of course, Minnesota. Dad loved to throw a line, as he would call it, and he liked to say he was absolutely masterful at it, which he was. He could artfully cast and delicately drop a 20 to 30-foot fishing line out onto a stream or river and land that artificial fly at the end of the line within inches of the fish. It was a real, even in the wind, it was a real treat to witness his artful rhythmic casting. He was also a purist. He tied his own flies, working with precision and care to attach tiny feathers, wire, and string to a miniature hook in order to mimic the real thing. He taught me the art of fly casting and would often exclaim, "Boy, you gotta keep that elbow on the shelf." Thank you, Dad, for the gifts of love, friendship, and fellowship. So I will end my remarks appropriately with a fishing poem. Wishing. Aren't we all wishing for mysteries in mountains, for wonders of the world, to seek out where they lie and witness truth unfurled, for pleasant alpine lakes, for soothing lagoons and bays, to wade in heaven's reflections and welcome morning rays, for childhood innocence and awe, for open doors and windows, to cast our hopes afar and bond with dearest friends, for joy to have and hold, for our heart's sincerest desires, to hook our chosen few and quench our inner fires, for chances to test our mettle, for challenges and races to win, to reel in moments of memories and live them all again, for love that speaks our language, for secrets found on scrolls, to net the loaves and fishes and feed our hungry souls. Aren't we all fishing?
It's by far the hardest thing I've ever done, to be so in love with you and so alone. Follow me where I go, what I do and who I know. Make it part of you to be a part of me. Follow me up and down, all the way and all around. Take my hand and say you'll follow me. It's long been on my mind, you know, it's been a long, long time. Tried to find a way that I can make you understand the way I feel about you, just how much I need you to be there when I can talk to you. There's no one else around. Follow me where I go, what I do and who I know. Make a part of you to be a part of me. Follow me up and down, all the way and all around. Take my hand and say you'll follow me. You see, I'd like to share my life with you and show you things I've done, places that I'm going to, places where I've been. To have you there beside me, never be alone. And all the time that you're with me, we will be at home. Follow me where I go, what I do and who I know. Make it part of you to be a part of me. Follow me up and down, all the way and all around. Take my hand and say you'll follow me. Take my hand and say you'll follow me.
Kate.
Hello, my name is Ellie, and I'm Susan's daughter, and I, along with my brother Peter, are Grand Pete's youngest grandchildren. I remember one day as Grand Pete was nearing his time with us, and I had finally gotten their darn Netflix account to work and saw that It's a Wonderful Life was available. I asked him if he wanted me to put it on, and his face lit up with a big smile. I sat next to him and held his hand as we watched George Bailey go through all of life's ups and downs. Like many of us, George Bailey wanted to make an impact and get the biggest, shiniest things, and yet at the end of the movie, he realizes that he had impacted so many people without even knowing it. I was always a little confused why my grandpa loved an over 2-hour black and white movie so much when color was available and great quality picture, but I finally started to get it as I sat with him there. These past few years have been difficult for many people, to say the least. And as a young person who had to come home from college because of COVID, it's been especially frustrating. However, I was lucky enough to stay in an apartment in Northeast just a couple blocks from my grandparents' condo. About once a week, I would go sit with my grandpa and just talk about what was on my mind, and he would try to impart some wisdom on my angry at the world self. His words impacted me in ways he probably didn't know. Time and time again, he would say that his faith was in young people's drive to make this world better. And then I would get pissed and say, hey, boomers left us with this mess. But what he meant was that he knew the importance of our belief that we all deserve more than what the world is giving us right now. He had faith that the world could change, that people could change if we treat them with kindness and help them learn. But he also kept saying, no one's going to do it for you, Ellie. No one's going to do it for Peter. If you see something that makes you mad or doesn't sit right, it's on you to figure out a solution. And my grandpa, he left a trail of warmth and possibility wherever he went. His life was all about helping each of us to be the best versions of ourselves that we can possibly be. He also believed that we can have new interests at any point in our lives, whether we are 8 years old or 80 years old. I vividly remember a couple of years ago when he asked me to meet him over a series of lunches where we would only speak in Spanish so that he could practice. Mind you, I am not perfect at Spanish, still working on it, but the waiters found it hilarious, and I was just so honored that he wanted to spend that time with me. By the end of the lunch, he was an expert at ordering pasteles de cangrejo, or crab cakes. He truly wanted to learn about the world, even when most people might be tired or worried that their brain can't acquire a new language as they get older. But that didn't matter to him. It was about pushing himself to try new things and constantly being curious about the people around him. I see my grandpa in the little things. The birds outside my Los Angeles dorm room window that wake me up each morning, a book that opens me up to new worlds and people, a crude birthday card with elderly people in their birthday suits on the front, and when my friend makes me eggs on a Sunday morning. I've also felt his presence in this last week with Roe v. Wade. I just know he would say, great, you're angry, but what are you doing about it? Anger only does so much if we can't figure out a potential solution to that anger. I think all the people here, both physically and in spirit, are just a testament to his belief in the people around him and our ability to choose a better world if we really want it. He knew that all we have is each other in the end, and I know that he loved you all so, so much.
My name is Joe Dayton. I was the founding director of Eagle Bluff Environmental Learning Center down in Lanesboro, Minnesota. If you know Lanesboro, Minnesota, it's about an hour southeast of Rochester, about 18 miles north of Iowa. Eagle Bluff is located in greater suburban Lanesboro, about 7 miles from downtown, of a population of 800. Ann asked me to talk today about Peter's involvement with something called Project EarthSense, which was a $25 million capital campaign back in the 90s to make environmental education more accessible to every student, K-12 student in the state of Minnesota. Since the 90s, on this weekend, Mother's Day weekend, Peter and Ann would come down and go birding in southeast Minnesota. And I don't know if you know that they would come down and stay with friends, Peter and Ellen Brown in Wabasha, and then come over and visit with us. And one of Peter's favorite birds to hear was a Rufusida towhee. And I can bird fairly well by ear. So I was out guiding with Peter, and I call my little presentation today a Tale of Two Guides. And Peter and Ann would come down and go birding, and we had a good time doing that. But after he had home dialysis, Peter asked me to guide him on a turkey hunt. And so he brought his home dialysis material down. We set up in the house. 9 o'clock, he disappears into the back room, does his home dialysis. Next morning, he's out at 8. We have breakfast. We go turkey hunting. And I don't know if you know about turkey hunting, but turkeys have excellent vision and excellent hearing. And they say if they could smell, they'd be impossible to hunt. So Peter and I are in a blind, a little doghouse blind that surrounds us totally. And you need to be quiet. And Peter incessantly is asking questions. How is the center doing? What's our occupancy? What's happening with the other directors? And I was trying politely as possible to answer Peter's questions. And Kip, I understood, while he never shot a turkey, because he just couldn't be quiet. So Peter has a pair of binoculars for birding that kind of reminds me of a World War II movie where you look at somebody on an American battleship and they're looking 20 miles in the horizon. They say, oh, that's the Bismarck. So Peter's looking across the valley about a mile away, and he's trying to describe this bird to me, such and such a character, is marking it under the eye, this is distance away. And I noticed 2 tom turkeys come walking into our decoys right out in front of the blind, and he can't see them. And I say, Peter, there's a tom. He goes, where? Right in front of the blind. So he sets his binoculars down, and he hunts with a 12-gauge long bore shotgun that he was goose hunting with, really long. So he grabs this and he tries to swing it around, and it's scraping against the side of the blind, making all kinds of noise. The youngest bird takes off and running. The mature one is still there, and he sticks his gun out the window and he said, shoot. And I said, yes. Boom. The bird falls over backwards, leg up in the air. He sets the gun down. I'm expecting high fives, congratulations as the guide. And he looks at me and he said, that's just terrible. If I would have thought about it, I would have never shot such a beautiful bird. Not the words that every guide wants to hear. So Peter, as a guide, spent 10 years guiding Project EarthSense through various different systems. Back in the late 80s, the state's 5 residential center directors were all going to the state legislature and trying to get bonding money to expand our facilities with some luck, a minimal luck, depending on the center. And the state then decided to conduct a couple of studies to figure out how best to make this all happen. And the net result of those studies was a recommendation to spend $42 million to improve the facilities around the state to make environmental education more accessible to kids. Unfunded, of course. So Peter and Jack Picotta, Jack, raise your hand, the director of Wolf Ridge. Come on, Jack, you can get your arm up there. There he is, sitting down in front, came up with the idea of the 5 centers working cooperatively together to raise $25 million to expand all facilities. Peter also served on the Blandon Foundation board, and it took 2 years of Blandon due diligence to decide to go ahead with this, and the Blandon Foundation committed $7.5 million of the $25 million capital campaign, subject to the Minnesota legislature agreeing to match that. So we then spent 2 years at the legislature working to get another $7.5 million worked into the bonding bill, and once that passed, another 5 years of raising the final $10 million of this $25 million capital campaign. Before COVID, we had about 85% of all the 5th and 8th graders in the state of Minnesota participating in an RELC experience. Many kids, when they graduated from high school, when asked what is the one thing they remember most on their K-12 career, is recalling going to a residential environmental learning center. Peter's lasting legacy is now something that we call the Minnesota model of environmental education. And the results are a wiser and better educated Minnesota citizenry making environmental decisions. People from other states and other countries around the world come and visit our centers to see this Minnesota legacy at work. And our thanks to Peter and Ann Heegaard for making it happen.
All right, I'm your closer. Oh, aren't we lucky, was something our Aunt Josie said to our Uncle Bill, one of my dad's 4 brothers. And it wasn't about a specific thing, but rather an ongoing feeling of gratitude for each other, for their kids, grandchildren, this whole crew of nieces and nephews, for their friends and experiences. And Aunt Josie, I feel the exact same way. I'm so very grateful to have been part of Pete's life, and by the luck of the draw, I got to be his kid. Dad and I are the youngest in our sibling lineups. He's one of 5, I'm the youngest of 3. And being the youngest requires a certain amount of creativity if you want to be heard above the dinner table racket. Blessed with a quick wit and a wry sense of humor, Dad was a supreme lyricist, although, as Kip said, more often in the vein of, there once was a man from Nantucket. But he was also deep and thoughtful, and when the occasion called, imparting sage, serious food for thought. I'm going to leave you with one of his favorites that has a particularly profound meaning now. He would clear his throat, look everybody in the eye, raise his finger, and say, remember, there are many Heegaard Peters, but there's only one Peter Heegaard.
I think that's us.
Let's go.
Some bright morning when this life is over, I'll fly away to that home on God's celestial shore. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have gone, I'll fly away. Like a bird from these prison walls I'll fly. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away. Oh, how glad and happy when we meet. I'll fly away. No more cold iron shackles on my feet. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away again. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joys will never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory. I'll fly away in the morning when I die. Hallelujah, by and by I'll fly away. I'll fly away.
Thank you, Eric, Jeff, and John, for that. And thank you to all of our speakers. We are better off today for having been in your presence and been able to listen to you. And as we were just introduced, it is now we have a few opportunities for us to join our voices together, to continue having our voices joined together. So I invite you into one of the poems of our ancestors, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. After Peter had his very big surgery last fall, I called to check up on him, and Ann answered the phone, and she put me on speakerphone, and I asked Peter how he was doing, and he said, "I'm great. I'm up." So I invite you all to get up, if you are able, and to sing "Joyful, Joyful, We Adore You" together, and then remain standing in the benediction and closing. Friends, A reminder that this is not the end. You are all invited to the Minneapolis Club to continue this, to continue the storytelling, to continue the memories and the relationships together. Peter was a believer in the power of relationship, and each of you know this intimately in one way or another. And he was also a firm believer in the ability of us all and the relationships that we are capable of holding to do good in the world, to make changes in our communities, to better the places and spaces that we reside in for ourselves and for everyone. May we each be the people that Peter believed we could be. I talked to him a few days before he died, and one of the things he said to me was, "Don't stop doing good things. Don't stop doing good things." Go forth from this place carrying the memory of Peter, the great gifts that he has given us, and the stories that will continue to be told. Go forth carrying Peter in your hearts and love one another and keep doing good things. Amen.